Continue. The honourable member for Desnethie, Mississippi, Churchill River.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, well, it is always an honour to rise in this place and speak on behalf of the people of Desnethie, Mississippi, Churchill River. This week, as we return to Parliament, especially as a member from northern Saskatchewan, I come with a heavy heart. As I begin today, I want to acknowledge the recent tragic events in northern Saskatchewan in the communities of James Smith Cree Nation and Weldon. As the healing journey begins for so many, it is important that in the days and weeks ahead, we do not allow our focus to be lost from what is going to be a long and difficult journey for many. Often as the media attention diminishes, so can the help and the support. The heavy burden these communities will carry will require a resolve to continue to be there for family, for friends and neighbors. We must not allow them to walk this journey alone. It is with these thoughts in mind that I rise to speak on Bill C-29 today, an act to provide for the establishment of a National Council for Reconciliation. Speaker, the work of truth and reconciliation needs to be viewed as a journey rather than a destination. Relationships are not easy, especially ones that have a long history of distrust. That distrust is the reason why a bill like Bill C-29 deserves to be looked at through a lens that focuses on a consensus-building approach. This will create better legislation. It is what is needed and, quite frankly, deserved. Bill C-29 attempts to honour calls to action 53 to 56 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission by creating an accountability mechanism on the progress of reconciliation across our country. Speaker, our party supports accountability. In fact, as the party that established the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we welcome it. We will support this bill to go to committee and work there to make improvements. With the purpose of building better legislation and in the advancement of reconciliation, there are a few matters that I feel should be addressed, some concerns, some questions, and some suggestions that we will make. I would like to take the next few minutes to speak to some of those concerns. The first concern I will address is around the appointment process of the Board of Directors of the National Council for Reconciliation, its transparency and independence. To help explain this, I want to speak to some of the steps and timelines that led up to Bill C-29 being tabled in the House. In December of 2017, the Prime Minister announced that he would start the process of establishing a National Council for Reconciliation by establishing an interim Board of Directors. By June of 2018, only 6 months later, the interim Board of Directors had presented its final report with 20 very specific recommendations, and it is worth noting, and it was confirmed at the technical briefing last night, that those 20 recommendations were the basis for the draft legal framework. One of those recommendations also included setting up a transitional committee to continue the work that was started. I want to read a quote from that final report. Quote, "As indicated in our interim report, the interim board believes it is important that a transitional committee be set up to continue the work proposed in the interim and final reports. During our tenure, we have heard from various organizations and community members that we need to move forward with speed and maintain the momentum to establish the NCR." End quote. Yet inexplicably, it took 3.5 years till December 2021 for the minister to finally get around to appointing the members of the transitional committee. Again, let's be clear. The development of the basis for the legal framework of Bill C-29 was already finished in June of 2018. Why the delay? This government, time and time again, on Indigenous issues, makes big announcements, holds press conferences, takes photographs, and then proceeds to ignore the real and difficult work. So now we fast forward to June of 2022, when the minister finally tabled Bill C-29, with just 2 days left in the spring session, I might add. That's 4 years after the recommendations. Speaker, it is not just the unacceptable timeframes, but the lack of independence and transparency of the selection process that is concerning. From the interim Board of Directors to the Transitional Committee to the Board of Directors of the Council, the process for selecting members has been at the sole discretion of the minister. In June, while Bill C-29 was being introduced, there were Indigenous organizations that were very public with their own concerns about this process. These concerns are valid because according to the TRC's call to action number 53, the National Council for Reconciliation is supposed to be an independent body. Speaker, a simple question. How is it independent if per Section 8 of this bill, the first board of directors is, quote, selected by the minister. Does the government really expect us to believe, based on their history, that they deserve the benefit of the doubt, that they would never put any undue pressure to get what they want? Finally, Speaker, are the minister's own words when explaining how this oversight body is needed, and I quote, "It isn't up to Canada to be grading itself." Speaker, I think the concerns around the selection process require the minister to be very clear in this House, and more importantly to Indigenous peoples, why he is comfortable in having so much direct control and influence on a body that will be tasked with holding his own government to account on advancing reconciliation. My next concern is that there's nothing in Bill C-29 that has anything concrete as far as measuring outcomes. Quantifying reconciliation is difficult, I admit, but a close look at Call to Action 55 will show that it includes several items that are in fact measurable. And I give a few examples. The comparative number of Indigenous children to non-Indigenous children in care and the reasons for that. The comparative funding for education of on and off reserve First Nations children. The comparative education and income attainments of Indigenous to non-Indigenous people. Progress on closing the gap on health outcomes. Progress on eliminating overrepresentation of Indigenous children in youth custody. Progress on reducing the rate of criminal victimization and homicide, family violence, and other crimes. And finally, progress on reducing overrepresentation in the justice and correctional systems. The concern, Speaker, is that if you want to measure accountability, you must set targets that determine success from failure. Like the axiom, what gets measured gets done. The PBO recently released a report in response to an INAN committee request that was very critical of the departments of ISC and CERNAC for spending increases without improvement in outcomes. And I'm going to quote from the report. The analysis conducted indicates that the increased spending did not result in a commensurate improvement in the ability of these organizations to achieve the goals that they had set for themselves. And that paragraph ends with, based on the qualitative review, the ability to achieve the targets specified has declined. Maybe this is what the government is afraid of, Speaker. Not only is there a lack of measurable outcomes in Bill C-29, but the wording seems to be purposely vague, just vague enough to avoid accountability. Chief Wilton Littlechild, who sat on both the interim board of directors and the transitional committee, when referring to the bill, told CBC News the wording needs to be strengthened. The purpose section of the bill uses the text to advance efforts for reconciliation, but Littlechild said the word efforts needs deletion. He says the bill should instead say advance reconciliation because it's building on work that's already laid a foundation. The preamble of the bill states the government should provide relevant information, which Littlechild says leaves the government to determine what is important or not. We could have taken out those kinds of words, he says. Speaker, when added all together, it seems there's a pattern of reducing the risk of accountability in the wording of the bill and in the lack of measurable outcomes that would require the government to follow through on its words and actions. My final concern is around who responds to the annual report issued by the National Council. Subsection 17.3 of the bill states that the minister must respond to the matters addressed by the NCR's annual report by publishing an annual report on the state of Indigenous peoples that outlines the Government of Canada's plans for advancing reconciliation. This does not honour the TRC's Call to Action 56, which clearly and unequivocally calls on the Prime Minister of Canada to formally respond. The Prime Minister has consistently said that no relationship is more important to Canada than the relationship with Indigenous peoples. Speaker, actions speak louder than words, and the Prime Minister should be the one responding directly, not delegating that responsibility to the Minister. In closing, Speaker, as I stated earlier, our party will support Bill C-29, and in the spirit of collaboration and in response to the Minister's own words of being willing to be open to perfecting this bill, we'll work with the members of the INAN Committee and will offer some amendments that we believe will make this bill better. It is now our duty to ensure that Bill C-29 is a piece of legislation that truly advances reconciliation. Thank you, Speaker.